Okay, so I'm going to go over how to run some descriptive statistics in SPSS. We are going to look at how to first just do descriptive statistics for a single variable, right? Then we're going to do the same thing for the descriptive statistics split by group level. So say, for example, we have study time for a bunch of participants, and we also have a variable that says their gender. So first we'll look at the the descriptive statistics and the plots for study time by itself, and then we'll split that by gender. So we'll look at it separately for the men and for the women. So first thing to do is to load in our data, right? We'll go to open another file, open, change this to all files, right? So it knows to look for files other than just SPSS files. Load in your data file, which for me is a .csv file. It's going to take us through this import wizard. Looks kind of janky at first, but these commas will, that's like how we know where the space is. So we use those commas to then split this into two variables. So it's set to the delimiter between values is a comma. The delimiter is just the spacer, right? So for a CSV file, this should be set to comma. If it's an Excel file, it probably will be able to tell that automatically. But because I'm using a CSV file, I just have to make sure that it's set to comma as the delimiter. So we'll go ahead and do this. And this is our basic view of what our data looks like after we've loaded it. This is the variable view, and this is the data view. So the first thing to look at is to make sure that your data is the correct type of variable. So for me, I have a gender variable that's coded as 0 and 1. And if you hover your mouse, it'll say the measure is nominal, right? It's treating this as a nominal variable, which is correct because it is a grouping variable. But for study hours, right, it's showing that it's a nominal variable as well, which is not the case. I want this to be a scale variable, which is a continuous variable. So I'm going to go to variable view down here at the bottom, excuse me, and then I'm going to change the measure to scale for study hours, right? I wanted to make sure that this was a scale variable. You won't always need to do this, just make sure when you load your data that it's the correct type of data, right? Make sure that your grouping variables are listed as nominal and your scale variables are listed as scale. And if you wanted, what we could do for our grouping variable, this is really helpful, is I coded it as 0, 1. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that it knows, hey, the zeros are the men and the ones are the women. And the way I did this was by going to variable view, selecting values. There's a little 3-dot thing that I pressed, and then I specified that the values of 0 were men and the values of 1 were women. So then I'll press OK, and sure enough, now it's updated under the values. So again, the way I did this was by clicking the values box. Okay, now we're good to go. So the first thing we'll do is we'll run the descriptives and the plots of study hours without worrying about our grouping variable, and then we'll do it with grouping variable. So go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Explore, and then move study hours into the dependent variable, or whichever variable for you is your variable of interest, right? So we'll do study hours for that. Press statistics and make sure that everything you want is selected. So we want descriptives, and I also want percentiles. I want my 25th, my 50th, my 75th, all those percentiles. So I'm going to check percentiles, press continue, go to plots. I'm going to select that I want a histogram. It will by default print out a box plot, but make sure that stem and leaf and histogram are checked. And for right now, I'm going to use my factor levels. Factor just means grouping variable. I'm going to treat my grouping variable together. And what that means is I don't want to see this separately for men and women or whatever my groups are yet. I just want to look at study hours in general first. And so just make sure if you do have a factor level that it's specified together, right? But for right now, I'm not looking at my grouping variable. I'm just looking at study hours in general. So I'll go ahead and select OK. And here we have our descriptives, our mean, median, variance, standard deviation, min, max, range, interquartile range, which is from Q1 to Q3, or the 25th to the 75th percentile. We have our skewness and our kurtosis. Here's our percentiles. So we have the 5th, the 10th, the 25th, the 50th, the 75th, the 90th, the 95th percentiles. And then we have our histogram down here, and it shows our mean, our standard deviation, the number of observations we have, which is n, our stem and leaf plot, and our box plot. And then this value is an outlier because it's outside of the whiskers. So again, this is how we did this if we just want to look at one variable and we're not concerned about looking at different like groups on that variable. So this is the distribution of study hours in general, including both men and women together. If we want to look at it, descriptive statistic and plots taking into account our group, so if we want to look at this separately for men and women, now what we'll do is we'll go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Explore, and now I'm going to move gender, my grouping variable, into factor list, right? Because this is my factor. Remember, factor just means grouping variable. Go to Statistics again, make sure that our percentiles are still checked, and descriptives. Go to Plots, make sure you have your stem and leaf and histogram checked again. But now we, sorry, I just want to check one thing. Yeah, no, we're good to go. Sorry about that. So we'll click Continue, and we will go ahead and press OK. And I'm just making sure. Yep, okay, everything worked out as planned. I wanted to make sure that our box plots would go separately, and they do. So now when we scroll up to the top, we'll look at it from the top. Sorry, it jumbles everything you already have together. That's why I was briefly confused for a second. Okay, here it is. So we have our men and women now separately, right? We have the number of observations for the men, the number of observations for the women, and then we have the study hours for the men and the study hours for the women. So the mean for the men is 7.58. The mean for the women is 4.00. We have the median for the men, median for the women, and then so on and so forth with all of our descriptive statistics. So it's the same thing as before, but now it's done it by levels of a group. So it's split this variable separately for men and women, okay? And then same thing, we have the percentiles for the men, so the 25th percentile of study hours for the men, 50th, 75th for the men, etc. Same thing for the women. Then we have our histogram. Histogram for gender equals men. So this is a histogram of study hours for the men and study hours for the women. Then we have the stem and leaf plot for the men, stem and leaf plot for the women, and then the box plot for the men and box plot for the women. And so this is really useful because we can see that there do appear to be differences between men and women, but we would need to run a statistical test to see if this is a statistically significant difference. And so again, we're looking at study hours for men and study hours for women separately. And so just to recap, the way that we were able to look at this split by our levels of our grouping variables, we went to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Explore, and then we made sure that gender was in the factor list, right? If we don't want to look at it split by levels of like a group, if we just want to look at overall study hours, we can remove this and then just run it just for study hours. But again, if we want to look at it by levels of a group, then we move this into factor. Factor just means grouping variable. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Oh, the last thing we can do is we can go to File, Export, and make sure that we have all visible selected so we don't get like a bunch of like background code and stuff printed out. Make sure that your document type is set to what you want it to be, which for me is a Word doc. And then this is where it's going to save your output to. Again, you don't have to do this, right? This is just if you want to have like a Word document version of your output. It's just going to be the same stuff we're looking at here, but printed out on a Word document. And then we could select this to be PowerPoint, and etc. So I might do a PowerPoint just to see what it looks like. So we'll do PowerPoint, and then this is where it's going to be saved on my computer. So I'm going to browse and change this, and I'm going to make it go somewhere else. And you can specify the name. So Descriptives PPT. I will save it. I'll hit OK. And now it's exporting it there. Probably take a second. Okay, and so now we see that we got this exported to a PowerPoint. It doesn't look very good. You probably just want this in a Word document, but however the case may be, this is just to show you how it would get exported. So again, it just saves it to the location you specify in your computer, and we can see everything that we looked at before. At the top was study hours by without gender included, and then now as we proceed, now it's been split by gender level. So we have the histogram for men, women, and then the box plots, etc. So, yeah, that was it. Thanks for watching.